Welcome to another episode of Improving Intimacy. Today, I'm excited to have a special guest with us, Kari Ferguson, who is the author of OCD Mormon. Ooh, did I get the title right? OCD Mormon.
Well,
And I'm curious, have you even been interested or wanting to change the title now with the whole name change, or have you felt like, no, I'm going to accept this? I'm curious about that title. What
right?
has been your thoughts?
We published it, and then because that's what my blog was called before, and then
Yeah,
then they had the whole like, don't call yourselves Mormons, and I don't know, we were just like, whatever. I guess that was like who I was known as. Is that at
yeah.
that point that it was just I don't know.
Well,
And
in the con,
yeah, it's good for my scrupulosity as well in a weird way.
that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, because I have to keep it that I'm bucking against what the church tells me to do. Says it.
Yeah, this is your form of exposure therapy here. Okay,
Exactly.
I got to accept
You
it.
can't change it. Yeah, it's out there.
Well, I'm excited. I've been thinking about this a lot, and you and I were talking offline just a minute ago about why didn't I find you until now? In fact, when did you publish the book? How
It
long ago?
came out in September of 2017.
Okay, so not too long
Yeah, it's
ago.
about 3-4 years ago now. Yeah.
And a friend of mine who, so for my audience who doesn't know, I actually deal with a large amount of anxiety, something I've actually been coming to terms with it, or rather discovering more over the most recent years here, and have been reaching out to some friends and family, and I've made a good friend with someone, and we were talking about this morning about, you know, let's write our story about this, and he's like, this is so triggering for us,
Right.
uh, and I don't know if I can. I've got myself into a good place, and I'm curious. So let's start off there. We'll get into some of the meat here, and I have some quotes from your book that I really valued. But I want to start off that way. Kind of, what motivated you to write this book, especially with somebody who struggles with anxiety
Right.
and putting your story out there?
For sure.
What made you decide to do that?
Yeah, well, I've always been a writer, so that's kind of how I, emotionally process things, I guess. So just for me, that was the logical step, I would say. But and I went through, like I wrote in the book, I went through a really intense, OCD breakdown, we'll say, without knowing what it was. And then I finally got help with the help of my husband and therapy and medication. And I made a friend at church who also has obsessive compulsive disorder. And so we had been talking about it. And I thought, there are a lot of people in our religion who have anxiety, who have these problems,
Mhm.
but we don't know what to call it. We don't know what it is. We don't even know that it's a mental illness, really. And I thought, I'm going to start a blog just about that, about having this issue as a Latter-day Saint. And maybe I can help some people because for me, like if I had known 10 years before, it would have been a lot
Mm.
easier. If I had realized fully what it meant and how I could get help, it would have changed, my whole married life and my mission and everything. So I thought, I can use my skill that I have, my writing, in order to help other people. So I started the blog, I think it was in I don't know, 2016 summer. And so, I just did that and it's sort of popular. I mean, not like huge or anything, not viral, but, enough that I was like, I could write a book about this. And so I started just in general of like mental illness and Latter-day Saints. And then on Twitter, I had this friend who was a LDS author named Medi Harrison. And so she kind of was my mentor and helped me really form the book. And she's like, no, you need to go into your story personally. Like, don't be general. Don't talk about, that's too much. That's too broad.
Yes.
like all mental illnesses and LDS faith. So she really was like, no, focus in. This is what you're known for. Like, write about having OCD and like your story. So I did. And yeah, Cedar Fort said, yeah, this is great. The person who read my submission had a sister, I think, with scrupulosity. And so she was like, yes, we need this in the church and in the, discourse.
Well, I want to explore more because you made it sound so easy to get this written here, and I'm
Yeah.
confident, even though I don't know your story,
Yeah.
in getting the book published.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it wasn't that simple or easy. Uh, but let's define this for the audience here. We've said a couple of times this word scrupulosity
Right.
in OCD. Uh, Explain what is
Sure.
OCD and what is scrupulosity? How are they the same and how are they different?
Okay. OCD, obviously, obsessive compulsive disorder. So you have, by nature, you have these thoughts that keep coming, and then it leads you to do things in order to like make yourself feel better. So, like for instance, you have a thought like, "My hands are dirty,"
Mhm.
um, and so you say, "Okay, well, I have to wash my hands." But then your brain says, "Oh, well, you didn't wash them well enough," and so then you have to keep washing your hands, or you touch something, and then, "Oh, your hands are dirty. You have to wash your hands again." So it's this kind of call and response where your brain is saying, "Oh, something's wrong," and then you physically. There's even mental OCD as well, where they do like mental
Yes.
compulsions. So it doesn't have to be a physical compulsion, but anything that you do to try and relieve these thoughts that you're having, if it's like enough that it's causing you, a disturbance to your life, to your day, to your, to your life, then it becomes, OCD, where it's a disorder and you should get treatment or help. Scrupulosity,
Interferes with your life.
yeah, if it interferes with your life, exactly. Um, and then scrupulosity specifically is a type of OCD. And that's something I didn't really know at first, was that there were different types of OCD, because people just throw around OCD so flippantly, like, "Oh, I like
Yes.
my books organized. I'm so OCD." But it's not an adjective. It's a disorder. It's
Mm.
serious. So yeah, I didn't realize there were so many different types until I went to therapy and people were telling all their
Mhm.
different stories, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, all these things are OCD that I've had." But scrupulosity is religious OCD, basically. And so it has to do with maybe worthiness, or, things like, "Oh, I'm not good enough," or, "Oh, I'm not worthy to go in the temple," or, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that thing," or, anything that relates to our religious upbringing and our, thoughts there.
But wait a second. You just described empathy, right?
Right?
So how is, I said something wrong. I may have hurt somebody's feelings.
Yeah.
What's the difference between
Right.
empathy and
And repent.
reasonableness
Yeah.
in repentance? So what's the difference?
Oh,
Help the listener know.
yeah, that's something my therapist and I talked about, and he's not LDS, but he said it's so hard with scrupulosity and people who deal with that, because a lot of times for them it's like the therapist versus God, and like, who is going to win that? Obviously God is going to win that, right?
Yes.
For a religious person, you're going to say, "No, this is like the spirit telling me I'm doing something wrong and I need to repent." So it can be really difficult to say, okay, where is this line that between like, this is a mental illness and it's telling me I'm doing everything wrong, and I actually am doing something wrong and I need to repent and change. So it's really difficult. Um, for me, my OCD really started with scrupulosity, like back in college. And
Mhm.
yeah, I just thought it was, I'm having a come to Jesus moment, and I'm realizing all these horrible things I'm doing wrong. And so I beat myself up, and so many issues. Like, I couldn't be alone really, because I was worried, and my brain would just keep going, and I would say, "Oh, I have to fast like on this random Thursday because I need help," and nothing was helping. I would take a nap, and I remember one time I had like sleep paralysis, which I'd never had before, where like you can't, like, your
Right.
body can't move. It's like, something like, this is not normal. And so I don't know. I think I realized that then, that something wasn't normal, but I didn't actually get help until like 10 years later. I did go on medication then.
Wow.
But yeah, I didn't really understand what it was or the other things it could cause. So yeah, so it is really difficult. I think if Mormons, we tend to know, or LDS, sorry, we tend to know like what is right and wrong, right? And if you're really pushing yourself past like the normal right and wrong, if you're like worried about every single thing, and it's so bad to the point where you feel like you can't be alone, or that's all you think about, or you're so worried, and that God hates you, or whatever, these are kind of warning signs that you probably have
Big
a
time.
problem and you should get help because you
Yes.
should not feel like that. God does not want you to feel like you're a terrible person all the time. That's not what Heavenly Father wants for us. So if you are feeling like that, that's
That's an ex
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
This is one of the most difficult things,
Mhm.
mental health issues to identify within our faith, because it's one of the few mental health uh, uh, struggles that we actually praise. So, for example, we reinforce scrupulosity a lot in the church, and we idolize people who have it. We
Right.
don't even know that they have it, or they may not even recognize they have it. Usually it's in the context of, I study the scriptures for 2 hours a day. I pray for 30 minutes twice a day.
It's not healthy, really.
No, it's not healthy, but yet it's the focus. When we see people like that, we admire them.
Right.
We often say, "Wow, I wish I had that." Let me
Right.
clarify: these are non-scholars, non-BYU professors, non-religious
Right.
teachers. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one thing to have
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, after realizing this, I like read through the Book of Mormon and I'm like, oh man, like Jacob, I worry about Jacob. I feel like he probably had, I mean, he even says that he has like my great anxiety of faith and great anxiety in my soul, I'm like, you feel bad for him, because they probably were dealing with these things. Even Enos, right? Like praying all day and all night. Like, I don't know, like maybe.
I've even thought, yeah, I love that you bring that up, because I've even thought about Nephi's prayer, or his poem. It's "Oh wretched man that I am," and I'm like,
Right.
holy cow, this.
It's been around the whole time. We just didn't have the words to describe it. Even my therapist said, I think Martin Luther, they think had OCD, who began basically the whole Protestant Reformation, which makes sense. He was like very worried about everything, and so I don't know. It's good and bad. It's good
It
and,
is.
yeah.
It's it's a fine line, because clearly there's nothing wrong with people who want to study the scriptures for 2 or 3 hours a day, and that's not
Yeah.
that's, I'm not
That's
exaggerating.
fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but like, going back to your earlier definition, it's when it interferes with your life. One of the measurements I use is, if you place those concepts of perfection
Right.
above your loved ones and
Yes.
above your relationship with God,
Yeah.
and you base your relationship off of, with God, off of those measurements,
Right.
you may have scrupulosity.
Yes. Yes. No, I totally agree. And that's the point it gets to. And, like I said, for me, I wish I realized that it was scrupulosity. And so I didn't have to the OCD didn't branch out into other areas of my life, because it did, because the OCD, if you get used to it in one way, it will try and get you in another way eventually. So
Yes.
yeah, I don't know. It's a
Personally,
tricky thing. Yeah.
I don't know if I would define myself having elements of scrupulosity, but as somebody who does battle with anxiety and ADHD,
Yeah.
my personality type is very different from what those we tend to admire in the church. Somebody who, going back to that example of routine scripture study,
Yeah.
sitting down, I used to force myself and judge my worthiness based off of my ability to perform like somebody else, let's use the word neurotypical
Right.
person.
Yeah.
When I came to grips that my form of study and prayer takes on a very different look
Yeah.
than somebody who's neurotypical,
Yeah.
it was a breath of fresh air. And to be okay with that, the way I study, the way I pray, uh, I felt closer to God immediately when I put off this.
Yes.
It gets me upset now when I get people who bear their testimony and says, if you study the scriptures, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, you will be closer to God. I go,
Hey.
nope. That's number one way to upset me and draw me further away from God.
Yes, everyone, that's so true. We all worship in different ways. And that, I think that's meant to be, but we, for some reason in the church, have taught like, this is the way you do it. And so, yeah, for me, it was like with the scrupulosity, it was like, I felt so much duty, like my relationship with the church was really just like, I have to do these things because this is what I've committed to do. And this is how you get to heaven. And so it was very like, this is my duty that I have to do this, if that makes sense. It wasn't so much out of love. I have testimony, but it wasn't like, I'm doing this because I love the Savior, or so necessarily, the first and foremost was like, okay, this is what I have to do because this is what God expects me to do. And this is what I've covenanted with him to do. And like my family, to have an eternal family, they're relying on me to, stay true. And all of these things, it was like all this pressure that like you have to keep doing, it in a certain way, but it's really unhealthy. And you get to a point where you're just like, I can't anymore, and you have to realize like maybe you don't have to accept every single calling, or maybe you don't have to be the perfect ministering sister or brother, because like I'm an introvert and that's like it's hard for me to do certain things, but other things I can do really well. Even like listening to General Conference, I don't get much out of it, but like reading it I can, where my husband's basically the opposite because he has ADHD. So yeah, everyone is different, and it's fine. We're made this way. It's not a sin to have mental illnesses or developmental
differences
or differences of any kind. Yeah.
So I'm going to read off of page 7 in your book.
Okay.
It touched me to just I struggle to put words into what I experience on this. Again, I may have some degree of scrupulosity as I look more and more inward. I don't think I fit the classic definition, definitely, but again, it may be more of my anxiety and ADHD, just the differences in approach. But I loved what you said here on page 7. It says, I spent evenings alone, wanting to burst into tears, but not feeling like it would do any good. I questioned why God would let me end up here alone. I wondered why I felt guilty and why I worried about every single thing. I was at a loss for what to do with myself. Uncertainty ate away at my sanity, and I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown at any second. Last year, I did, and it was a surprise because I have always coped what I would have said well with my anxiety. I think because, ironically, my ADD allowed me to break free of rigidity.
Right.
And I actually think I was blessed with ADHD for that reason. I don't know if blessed is the right word,
right?
Because that's not fair to others. But it definitely allowed me to cope. But I fortunately have a wife who is like, tell me, share with me. And I never felt like I could. It's like, do you really want to know what's going on in here? And as I share now, she's like, oh, this is what, in fact, yesterday, Sunday, I was having a really bad day. And when we came home from church, we're going to church now. And I told her, I says, I can't even be touched. I can't, this is, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have to go isolate myself. And she goes, oh my goodness, I had no idea. I says, this is how I've pretended for so long. Are you wanting me to share this with you? I have felt alone, even in the midst of the most beautiful support system, because I don't feel like people could relate to me. When I read that paragraph, it tells me you know exactly what that was like.
Yes. Yeah.
Share with me. Well, I guess.
Yeah. No.
Let me formulate that question a little bit better here. You said earlier, well, in general, you have so much insight right now about why you did things, and you wish you'd known this 10 years earlier. But the truth of the matter, most people with scrupulosity will not receive that information. Do you feel, because as I look at this and I say, if somebody told me 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have said, what are you talking about? Even with just anxiety.
Right.
Do you feel like you would have listened to you 10?
No. Well, it's interesting. When I was writing the book, I got out my old journals, and I had journaled through college basically. And so I was reading from this time period of when it went down, like when it was really bad, like I wrote about there. And I was just reading like, oh my gosh, and then I read about how I went back to BYU. I was doing an internship at the time in Seattle. Um, and so I went back to BYU and went to the health center. So I was like, I'm going to, I need to get help of some kind. My mom's a nurse. So she was like, just go to the health center and tell them. And I had written down in my journal, like I went to the health center and they told me I had obsessive compulsive disorder. And I was like, what? Like I knew? They told me? So exactly, like I was told, but it just like it went over my head. They must not have explained, or I wasn't ready to accept that that's what I had. I don't know. And that's how I got on medication, was that visit. But like I literally, until I reread it, that journal, years later, I was like, what, they told me? I didn't know. Like I literally, it didn't, come to me. So that's your answer. They did tell me, and I was like, no, I'm not going to
Yes.
do that. I don't care. Yeah.
So I guess the next question is
Yeah.
this is what I think is the most difficult aspect about this is one, being able to recognize that this is actually a problem.
Right.
We've reinforced this within our church culture
Yeah.
to idolize, admire, and even encourage
Yes.
this type of behavior, thinking it's good.
Yeah.
I get a lot of pushback when I identify this, especially around sexuality,
Yes.
which is what I deal with the majority of the time.
Yeah.
Is are you telling me not to listen to the prophets? Are you telling me to not be perfect? How would you recommend, knowing what you know now, to
Yeah.
talk into? I realize we can't convince people, but
Right.
what are your thoughts? How would you go about helping people recognize this?
Yeah. It is so hard. And when I was like writing the book and publishing it, I was Relief Society president at the time as well.
Sorry.
So it was like also, I had this overwhelming, calling. But and so I was able to talk with a lot of sisters and realize like, oh, they have, mental health problems. And the ones who did and knew, they felt more comfortable talking to me because I was so open about my mental health issues. And
Mhm.
so it was actually a benefit having, that openness. So I don't know, I think those of us who do have mental health issues need to be more open at church about it and more vocal about it. Because then those people who do have it but maybe don't realize it can start saying, oh, like, oh, I recognize that in myself, or oh yeah, I've done that. And then, you get that seed planted. And it does take, years sometimes for people to be diagnosed with anxiety or, OCD. Anxiety is more when people are like, oh yeah, I have anxiety. I don't know. Everybody seems like, they're willing to admit that. But yeah, I don't know. So for me, it's like
It's an acceptable mental health issue.
it's an acceptable, exactly. Where scrupulosity is like, no, that's good. You're like that. So I think also if church leadership, which they've done a lot better recently, really begins to say like, okay, this is an issue that we have, and stating it and coming out and being really just really transparent about it. And it's okay. And, this is, we don't want to be like this. We want to get help, like it's not good to be obsessed about being worthy or perfect. I think as like the more, the higher ups start to talk about it more, it will become something that people are like, oh, okay. And Elder Holland gave a great talk a couple of years ago about that.
He's
And
great.
they've done ensign articles, about these things as well. So they are working on it, I feel like. We did a conference called Anxiety Disorders in Mormonism shortly after the book was published. And so that was great. And I think we had church, leadership there from some department. I don't know. So, kind of probably checking up on us, seeing like, are they really teaching good things? But also I hope it helped them to realize like this is an issue. And it was sold out, this conference at the Joseph Smith Memorial Building. And, this is something in the church that we need to talk about more. So yeah, I don't know.
My goodness. Yes.
So just,
I think that's what's interesting here is and I apologize. I think we're on a slight delay here, so I don't mean to be talking over you. Uh, is you've published this book now 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and this is the first time I'm hearing it.
Right.
And I'm a mental health professional. And to your point, I am surprised. I am absolutely baffled why you haven't been on. And this is not a criticism to my colleagues,
No.
but I am surprised that you haven't been on every mental health podcast in the LDS community, uh, being that this is such an important topic, and it is related to anxiety, depression.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have scrupulosity specifically, this
Yeah.
is prevalent
Yeah.
in the church.
Yeah.
And so you're right, this needs to get out. And so if I could do my part, and I agree with you, there's kind of a paradox because
Yeah.
as you said, and I 100% agree, the upper leadership need to be talking about it more.
Yeah.
But that's also kind of fueling the problem. We're waiting for our
Yeah. No,
leaders of authority to say, this is what you need to do.
it's true. And, there is this divide, I think, with a lot of church members. Like I did a book signing at a church bookstore in Washington after the book came out. And I was sitting there and I had the books and I heard someone walking by like, oh, OCD Mormon, oh, that's, that doesn't matter. OCD doesn't
Really?
matter. Yeah. I was like, I'm right here. But it is one of the, specifically OCD is one that people don't really realize is a real mental health disorder. If that sounds terrible, but it's true because we use it so flippantly, the OCD term. So I don't know. Yeah, it's really hard. I think anxiety is an easier one. And people will say like, okay, yeah, you have anxiety. But all the mental illnesses really are so comorbid with each other where you can have one and the other. They kind of like to pair up and be friends, which is not fun.
Yes.
So yeah, like I have OCD, but I also do have anxiety generally. I've been, having suicidal thoughts before because of all of these things. So they all go hand in hand and they can get so deep if you don't address them and cause other, problems and cause even like physical problems. Like one time I thought I was having a heart attack, after my breakdown in college. And so I had to go and like do EKG, testing. So I thought I was having a heart attack. So
I've been there.
Yeah, it's like if you're having these things, like there's something wrong, and let's get help because it's available, and it's great. When I went to BYU Health Center and they just gave me the medication, and there wasn't, as I remember, not really a discussion about other options. And I think a lot of us do want just like, okay, give me the drugs and I'll be fine. We don't want to like put in the work and put in the time because we're so busy too in the church. We're so busy. We have all these callings and we have our kids and we have, this and the school and all the jobs. And it's like, when do I have time to go to a therapist? Like when am I going to do that? But it's so...
We need an immediate solution.
Yeah, we want the immediate solution. And, the medication is great. It helps kind of take it down a notch, at least for me. And I don't know for you if you're on, anything. But like being in therapy just helps you understand like why and what it really is and how you can behaviorally take care of it and get better. And when it comes up in other areas, you recognize it more than just like taking a medication. It really, therapy is so important, and it's so hard to get for some people. It's hard to find the right therapist. It's hard to get an appointment with a therapist, and these are things that are also obstacles.
And
that are huge. Yeah.
And you address this in the book very well. I have so many questions. This is such an exciting topic for me. So let me organize my thoughts here because you brought up this and you talk about this in the book really well too. It's one thing to find a therapist and to find a therapist who really knows how to address this.
Yes.
But before I ask that question, I want to talk about a nuance around this. And one of the things that really prevents us from, at least in the church community, that is recognizing we need help is what we perceive as the spiritual. And I'm curious because I don't remember you talking about this in the book or at least bringing it up, is what we perceive as the spiritual reward we get when we are following our scrupulosity. I often hear people will say, you telling me this is a mental illness? When I read, for 2 hours a day, I pray repetitiously.
Yeah.
I feel closer to the Lord.
Right.
That
I mean, that's wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
how do we? Is that something you experienced? And if you did, how did you address it?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that is so hard. And I've been doing research for a different project about generational differences in worship. Um, and so I was reading articles, and they're doing experiments, and they actually used LDS people, which I thought was great, for these experiments about neuroscientists and neurologists are doing this about how our brain reacts to religion. I read this
Mhm.
article called like Your Brain on God. And this doctor,
Great article out of University of Utah.
yeah, yeah. And just basically how our brain probably over the thousands of years since we came up with religion, um, our brains have become, yeah, the religion helps, it turns on different parts of our brain, like the responses like for pleasure,
Hmm.
yeah, like cause and effect. We're like, ooh, yeah. So we pray and we feel better about it. And it's like, it's literally hardwired into our brain to feel that way now, with religious experiences, especially for LDS people, apparently. So yeah, like if you talk about God or something in the experiment, you probably know as well, as well as I do,
Hmm.
but yeah, like they were happier. And so it really is part of our brain, but it's just like a drug where you can get addicted to that, um, in a way. And that sounds awful, right? Like probably people will be like, oh, you can't say you're addicted to religion. Like it's not bad, it's good. But, God also says like moderation in all things. And for the average person, average, LDS individual, like God, I don't think he wants us praying 2 hours a day or reading 2 hours of scriptures a day. Like there's so many, he wants us to be with our family and enjoying the earth and, being good examples out of our own home. So it's hard. It's really, I don't know if I answered any
It
question.
is hard.
It's hard. Yeah.
You did. And actually, that research, I'm glad you brought it up because it's one that I've written about. And we talk a lot about it. You bring it up, it's like a drug. It
Yeah.
actually shows something quite the opposite. And this is what I mean. We've been doing a lot of brain scans around people who are behaviorally addicted to like pornography or these other things,
Yeah.
forms of media, and they found that this brain response of studying the scriptures and following the leaders or reading quotes from the prophets lit up the brain in a similar way as those who look at porn.
Right.
And so, what we've been identifying, what some of the best researchers have been identifying, is there's something else going on
Yeah.
that's beyond this chemical addiction, which is not like a drug, actually.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
what we are creating in our belief system, what we're expecting to receive from it. And so what we're identifying is we need to redefine how we experience those relationships.
Right.
And so I think you actually did answer the question is I don't need to read 3 hours a day to have this feeling of closeness with the Lord.
Yeah.
I can create this in a way that's pleasing to Him and in a way that's more appropriate for me. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yes. More is not always better, you know?
Correct.
Yeah. No,
It,
it's interesting. And I read this book. I'm trying to see if I have it here on my shelf about George Albert Smith, the prophet, and how he, basically he had mental illness, mental health problems, but they didn't really diagnose it because he was, back in the
I love
30s,
this
40s.
example.
Yeah, and reading it, I was like, oh, he has, anxiety, obviously, and probably obsessive compulsive disorder. And, they try to do ridiculous things to the poor man, like you have to live outside in the back cottage or, all these just crazy things. You have to take time off from being an apostle and all of these things. And it helped me feel better about my own problems because I'm like, okay, even the prophet had this. And I think it allowed him to be more empathetic when he became prophet. He was prophet right after World War II. And so I think, having those experiences and having the mental health problems that he did, I think it made him, the prophet he needed to be for that time period, even though it was awful and he didn't have the correct treatment because he didn't have it then, really. But just
Mhm.
to know, like, okay, it can be a blessing in some ways, like you said. It can be awful too, and so it is awful, but it can help us learn empathy and learn different skills that the Lord can then use to help the kingdom. I don't know. It's yeah,
I I I believe it was George Albert Smith, because as I was telling you offline, I've done such extensive research.
yeah,
Sometimes stories cross, so I hope I'm remembering correctly.
yeah.
And I find it was a missed opportunity when we're studying him as a prophet that they didn't include that in the material, and
Right.
how he would actually isolate himself
Yes.
in California for months at a time
Yeah.
to escape it all and to recover. And what a benefit that would be to hear as a
Yeah.
church community. I think, and I
And the
have no idea.
apostle
I'm
needed to do that for his mental health. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
and I don't want to pretend I know what the leadership is thinking when they develop this material, but maybe my only guess is maybe they don't want us to have a negative light on George Albert Smith, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that would be so, and so when I teach that lesson that I sometimes get asked to teach, I make sure I include
Right.
that. It's like, oh my goodness, isn't he more relatable now?
Right.
Isn't
I mean,
isn't it make you feel good?
yeah, I mean, I even think about, Christ when he had to go, and he would like go up into the mountains and pray by himself. I'm like, yeah, like I relate to that, like needing to get away from all of the people and all the things going on around you and just have the solitude. And I'm like, yeah,
Yes.
I can relate to that. Or just, like being asleep in the boat and like, go take care of yourselves, like solve the problem on your own.
Absolutely.
I think it does, it humanizes everyone, these leaders. Um, and
Yes.
just the thing is, it's sad, but like you said, there's such like a negative perception of mental illness, not just in the church but in the church, but everywhere, and so, and of therapy and things like that, and people think, well, I'm not being good enough, more, I'm not praying enough if I'm depressed, like if you're unhappy, you're just not being a good enough, Latter-day Saint. And you hear that a lot,
Right.
like these, you just have to pray it away, or fast more, or pull up your bootstraps. And
Correct.
it's not that's not the right way to deal with this. And I think it's hard to change that, demographic of the church and of society, that thinks that like mental illness is a personal
It
weakness,
is.
because it's not a sin, it's not a weakness. It's a real thing, just like if you had cancer, or if you had, endometriosis, or whatever. It's a real illness. Yeah.
But to your earlier point, I'm going to come back to that other question is
Yeah.
when we do seek help.
Hmm.
So let's step out of even the LDS community right now. Let's talk about the medical community.
Yeah.
I remember, so I'm putting the pieces together myself over the years, and I had a nervous breakdown. Oh, I don't remember the year now. It might have been around 2006 or seven.
Yeah.
And I thought I was, so your story about heart attack hit home for me because
Yeah.
I remember checking myself in and thought I was dying. At that time I was also 265 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
I was, and so I thought I was prime heart attack,
Right.
whatever. And I checked myself in, and they did all the tests, and they're like, "You're fine." I says,
Right.
"I am not fine," and
Yeah.
they looked at me like I was crazy, like,
Yeah.
get out of here. And I felt like it was more of just they were protecting themselves from liability to
Right.
keep me there. And I was, of course, feeling a lot of shame. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
I am,
Yeah.
it's my, the word I can't even describe. People who have had
Right.
a severe panic attack understand. And that's what it ended up being. But there was no one sat me down and says, look,
Yeah.
what we believe is happening here and how we think we can help this. I
Yeah.
realize it was an emergency urgent care facility, but that also goes to the point. Wh- our society, we're now in 2020, and even with me having a nervous breakdown last year in 2020,
Yeah.
the help and the insight, and I'm a mental health therapist, and I was
Sure.
struggling to identify
Right.
what was happening. And it's always harder when it's happening to you.
Right.
But uh, to be able to identify it and to get the help, it's just like, here, take this or Klonopin or whatever. Let's just calm you down and get you home. And then, as you talk about in the book, and this is where my next question is how it's one thing to identify that you may have a problem, and then another to find a therapist
Yeah.
who really knows how to deal with this. And as a therapist,
Yeah.
I struggle to find people who are adequately trained
Oh, for
to
sure.
get to refer people to.
Yeah.
What was your process? And I know you brought it up a little bit in your book, but
Yeah.
how did you find the right therapist for you?
Yeah. I mean, luck really. No, but
It's true.
it's true. It's true. I was having this at the time. It was contamination OCD that got really bad,
Mhm.
and my husband was like, "This is not normal. You need help." And I was like, "No, no, I'm fine. I can do that. I am a strong person. I don't need help." And he's like, "No, you need help." So I was really blessed with a husband who's really supportive and had a family with mental illness, and so he could recognize this and not take no for an answer. Really, he's like, "No, you need help." So I was too involved or too emotionally upset to even call doctors, which a lot of people, are at that point when
Mhm.
we're going through a
Mhm.
breakdown. Like, you can't, like, you're not like, okay, let me go research all the different doctors that I could go to. Like, no, you're like, you're having a breakdown. So I was lucky. He started calling the doctors, and
Oh
it was
wow.
to the point where he was like, even calling like the in care, yeah, people like, can she come in and stay there, and they're like, no, we're full, or oh no, we don't have any appointments for 2 months, and he's like, this is not, we need something now. And so he called someone, a doctor in Seattle. We were living on an island in the Puget Sound at the time, near Seattle.
Oh wow.
But he called a doctor in Seattle, and he's like, my wife's having a really hard time with this, and he's like, well, we have a group session tonight that you could come to, and I had a cancellation. I have a cancellation the next day too for an appointment. So it was just like totally random, right? That he called this
Mm.
one doctor that day at that time and the cancellation. So I was very lucky. I was very lucky. And he, I went to the group, and that's when I was like, oh yeah, this is what I have. And then, yeah, I went to him for the appointment, and he told me, go to your general doctor and get on medication for now, because it will help you in the meantime to, calm down. Um, and then we'll work on the therapy once you can, like, you're well enough that you can actually do the exposure therapy and do the things that you need to do. So I went to my other doctor, got medication. Then I went home for Christmas to my parents' house with our family. And I was like suicidal, basically, like having suicidal thoughts because of, I don't, everything.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't go back to this island where we lived, because I was like, it's dirty and contamination. And so we flew home and drove to Portland and started looking at houses down there, to move, because we were building a house on Vashon Island. But we're like, we need something better in the meantime, that's closer to therapy, because I didn't want to take like a ferry and then drive a half hour to go to the therapist every week. It's like, that is,
Mhm.
a 2-hour commute is too much. So, we were lucky enough that we could do that. And we bought a house down near Portland. And so I came back to my therapist, and I'm like, we're moving. He's like, what? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, like we need to move. It's various reasons. And so he said, well, I have a friend down there, another therapist in Portland, and I will
Oh wow.
transfer you over there. And so I was like, oh, great. He's me, but in Portland. So I was like, okay, that's fine. That's great. So I moved down there, and I met with him, and he was great. He was like, we hit it off even better than I did with the one in Seattle. And I don't know, I met with him every week at first, and was able to make progress on the things that were really bad. I started with the contamination, which was really the one that was awful for me. And then once that was kind of under control, then he said, okay, now what else what else is the OCD touching? And then we were able to go to, the scrupulosity or the hit and run OCD or whatever. There's all these different subtypes, but
Wow.
it was just luck. And so I feel really lucky that I had that experience, and it's been really hard to now, I didn't keep going, I stopped going to see him once I was better, and I was like, oh, I'm doing so well with this whole, the behavioral therapy, and I know what to do now. This is great. So I'm like, I'm going to go off my medication. I don't need to see my therapist very much. I know what I'm doing now. And I had a total breakdown, like while I was writing the book, like total,
Wow.
like right back where I was basically. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I know what I'm supposed to do. Like you're a therapist. You're like, I know the tools, but I can't use them myself. Like, what is going on? And my friend had to come and she checked me in.
Let me pause you for a second.
Yeah.
Let me pause you for a second, because I think this is important to emphasize to those people who don't experience this
Yeah.
when they're trying to be loving and supportive.
Mhm.
That there's, one of the things I discovered really quick. I understand all the concepts, techniques, and tools with
Right.
grounding, with mindfulness,
Yeah.
but when your brain gets into a place of ruminating,
Yes.
no amount of grounding, mindfulness, breathing techniques
Yeah.
help. And I want to say that with a caveat. I'm not saying that it's not going to be helpful. Don't do it.
Yeah.
You definitely do it. I'm not saying don't do it,
Right.
but when your loving network, your family, your support system is getting frustrated, saying, "Aren't you doing this?" or "You need to do this,"
Yeah.
I think it's important for them to remember, because it may help you and get you into a good place. It does help us, but it's not the solution.
Mhm.
And it's probably not as effective as it may be for you. Is that your experience?
Yeah. It, for me, it was like, yeah, I knew what I should be doing. But I was like, no, I think it was pride too. Like, I don't want to have to go back to the therapist and tell him I failed,
Ah, yes,
Um,
yes.
I know what I should be doing, but I can't do it. My brain is just like, nope, nope, this is
So
either.
you couldn't even get there. Your
Yeah,
brain wouldn't let you even do it.
yeah. And so I had the friend who had OCD and that I mentioned earlier. And she was like, I'm taking you to the hospital because,
Mhm.
like I would tell her things like,
She
I
intervened.
think about like going on a walk. I'm like, I could just walk out into traffic right now, like wouldn't matter. She's like, I'm taking you to the hospital because that is not normal thoughts to have. And so I went, and yeah, they gave me some drugs. And then the next day I went to my doctor and got back on medication. But yeah, no, it's hard. And I think it's even now, like I'm not going to a therapist regularly. And I'm like, oh, I don't need to go to the therapist, but I should. I should. Even not
Mhm.
like every week, but I should check in once a month or once every 3 months. I think the accountability is so important. And that's what keeps you like on track. Like I'm on medication now again still, and that's like keeping me fine. But if something happened, something major, I would probably have another break. I would probably go back to the same spot. And so it's really hard. It's a constant, it's a lifelong,
Understood.
yeah. And medication doesn't always work as well as it used to. And so, you have to have these tools in your toolbox and recognize like, okay, I can't do this on my own. So yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time. I have
Yeah.
so many thoughts and questions.
Yeah.
Are you okay if we go beyond the hour?
Yeah.
Because we haven't even, in what you don't really address in the book,
Yeah.
is how this affected your intimate relationship
Yes.
with
Yeah.
your husband, and
Oh, totally.
not just sexually, but
No, yeah.
connection in all of it. Are you comfortable in
Yeah,
exploring that?
for sure. I mean, I laugh because I remember these instances, and to me, they were like, oh my gosh, like life and death. And now I'm like, what was I doing? But when I had the contamination OCD, he would like take the laundry downstairs or something, let's say. And I would say, you have to go wash your hands.
Mhm.
He's like, why? I'm like, because you touched the dirty laundry. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, then you're not going to sleep in the bed tonight. And he's like, what? I'm like, no, you have to sleep on the couch unless you wash your hands. And he was just like, what are you talking about? You know, so things like that, like, or even just touching, you know, like he would go by and, you know, pat me on the bum or something. And I'd be like, what are you doing? Don't touch me. Like, don't touch me there. Like, he's like, what? Like, what's the problem? Like, just, you know? So these just like little things that are just, you know, natural, you know, husband and wife things. I'm like, whoa, you know, thinking like, this is wrong. This is, you're dirty. This is awful. And yeah, even sex, I was like, whoa, this is dirty. Like, we can't, you know, like, it was very like, we have to have it on a certain sheet, or, you know, have sex in a certain time or what, you know, like I take off my garments or my underwear. I have to like fold them and put them in a spot, or put them on like a Kleenex because they're dirty. And it really ruins the moment, you know, to be like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You know, like, or if you touch anything, you have to go wash your hands. And so, yeah, it really does affect your intimacy and your relationship with your spouse, because in your mind, you're like, this is totally logical and this is what I have to do to maintain my sanity. And to them, they're like, what is going on? Like, this is not okay. So yeah, it's really hard on spouses and children too. I was like, I'm not going to color with my kids because they touched the markers and maybe they didn't wash their hands after they went to the bathroom. So I'm not going to color with them, or I'm not going to like sit on the floor with them because the floor is dirty, or, you know, just all of these things would factor into it. And it changed my whole relationship with my whole family. Oh, yeah.
So because my group is focused on intimacy,
Yeah.
specifically, what do you do now?
Yeah.
Do you feel like sex is now pleasurable for you? Or I guess I made an assumption. It sounds like sex was not a pleasurable experience
No,
before.
no, it's kind of like
Do you feel like it is now?
you know, it's not totally better. Like, I've tried to be better about it, but there's still, it like becomes a habit when you do these things often enough. And so like, even without thinking about it, I'm like, okay, like, we're going to move over to your side of the bed if we're going to have sex, because I don't want to get my side dirty. Like, still, you know, like,
Yeah.
so, and
I'm glad you can laugh about it.
I try not to be obvious about it, but, you know, I'll scoot over or whatever. Or I'll be like, I'll look like where he puts, you know, the underwear, when like, okay, is it in a good spot? Okay, we're good. Because, you know, luckily we've talked about it. We were interviewed for Vice on this topic, OCD and intimacy. So you can look that up. But
We'll include the link.
yeah, find the link and include it. And it was really good, actually. He was in the conversation, obviously. And it was like couples therapy, just talking it out. And him saying, okay, this bothers me when you do this. And I was like, really? You know, so I think couples need to be able to open up to each other about that, about sex, and like what are problems or, you know, issues that each person has, because it's really healthy, actually. And I think we don't talk about it at church because we're like, that is a private thing, you know, and you know, I'm Mormon and I can't do this. And like, we can't talk about it, or we can't, you know, use sex toys or whatever, you know, whatever people think. Because we don't talk about it, we have all these like assumptions of what we can and can't do, I think, or should and shouldn't do. But really, is that even like, you know, a thing? I don't know. You know, like using sex toys. Like, I was like, no, we don't do this. He's like, no, like, it's fine. But so like these things that we've had to work on and still work on, but talking about it and being open about it with some random stranger actually really helped us to come to terms and to be like, okay, you know, we need to be better at this, or I need to be better at it, and not let the OCD take over that, and be okay with having pleasure.
Again.
Yeah. With, you know, it's okay.
Yes.
To feel good about this, which for some reason I never did. Well, you know,
you bring it up again.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's, again, the taboo and the somehow someone predefined we're not supposed to talk about certain things. Like my wife was just telling me, she was at book club and they brought up Emily Nagoski, one of Emily Nagoski's books, which is great, about female pleasure. Yeah. And one of the people says, let's do that for our book club. And she was excited. She says, it's changed my relationship for the better.
Yeah.
And the response, and again, I'm not criticizing anybody. I wasn't there, but the automatic response was like, no, gross, we don't talk about that thing. And it's like, oh, we're feeding the problem. We're
Yeah.
feeding the problem, and we're not allowing ourselves to identify, well, I know I can have pleasure, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. And if we don't talk about it, how do we learn about it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
How do we learn?
like,
How do we even know, what it is? What? Yeah. No, exactly.
even like with sex toys, it's like, yes, absolutely. So has that been a helpful thing for you? Has incorporating uh, uh, tools, I like to call them sex tools. Toys makes it sound, which there's nothing wrong with saying toys, but
Yeah.
from a therapeutic mind, it's like, it's a tool. It's to help you.
No, and it has. And just my husband wasn't always active at church, and so I was not his first sexual partner, we'll say. And I was like very worried about that at first, because it was like, I don't know anything about this, and I could be very bad, and he would know, because I'm not the only person he's been with. But so then I was also like, oh well, is this just because you weren't always active in church, so that's why it's okay to do these, or you think it's okay to do these things? But no, it's fine. And yeah, the tools have been very helpful. And but it has taken me a while to be like okay with it, or to be okay with like doing it myself.
Yes.
Not just when he's there, things like that, like having pleasure, like
Has that been helpful for you? Allowing you to be in your own space and does that help manage your anxiety so that you don't feel like you're having to perform for anybody, just
yeah.
yourself?
Yeah, and I always used to be like, okay, well, when he's done, then it's like we're done, but now I'm like, no, now it's my turn, and so we'll use the tool, we'll use the tool, and
Toy is fine.
yeah, it really has helped. Like, it's not just for him that this
No.
is for pleasure. Like, I should also enjoy this, and it can be really stress reducing as well for me, and not just like a stressful occasion. Like, okay, I have to like, be good for him, and then he gets his pleasure, and then like we're done. Like, no, it's not just a one way thing. We're not the tool, the women. Like, we also deserve to have pleasure.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
something that took so long for me to realize, and also to even like allow myself to get to that point of orgasm. Like, my body was always just like, no, 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 like I can't lose control because of my mental illness and my health. Like, I have to always be in control. I can't like not know what's going to happen, or and so yeah, just like being able to let that go.
The way you just phrased that there,
Yeah.
the way you just phrased that, I can't let myself lose control.
Mhm.
I have heard that
Yeah.
from many, many women in counseling, that they feel like when they're on the verge of orgasm,
Yeah.
they're losing control. I clearly can't identify as a
Yeah.
woman
Right.
in what you're experiencing, but that was a very triggering word or phrase for me. As I'm listening, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, and I want to be careful. I don't want to
No. Yeah.
do a broad stroke of scrupulosity across everyone who may have experienced it that way, but that does sound like possibly a symptom of I'm losing control.
Yeah.
What's going to happen here? What do you think?
I think it is. I think you're right, and I think I don't know. Yeah, I was just like, I can't. It's very real. Like, even every time, really, I'm like, okay, you have to like make a decision. Like, it's okay. It's okay to lose, to not be in control.
Experience it.
Experience it. Yeah. And then you get like past that point, you're like, oh, okay, this is what they're talking about. Like this, but if you don't get past that point, you never get past that point, and
Yes.
you don't realize what is on the other side of it. And so yeah, it's a huge thing, and it can be so good for women. I was reading a book about like hormones, for women, like it's called the Hormone Cure, and it talks about that too, like that women need to have this time, where they're just massaged there, like it's really helpful actually
Yes.
for our mental health. I was like, oh, okay. And I was like telling my husband, he's like, I'll do that. That's great. Like I will help you with that whenever you want. Like we'll have our massage time. But just realizing like, it's not bad. I think so much in church we're taught like this is bad, because just growing up, it's like, it's bad, bad, bad until you're married and then it's great and fine. But we're not going to talk about it or what you do or what it's supposed to feel like at all. Ever.
Exactly.
And it's not healthy.
Very good point.
It's not healthy to be like that, to have it be such
No.
a taboo. And then suddenly it's fine. Like our brains can't really process that. It takes.
That's
yeah.
One of the hardest things for me to communicate with people who I wouldn't diagnose as having scrupulosity is just a general cultural belief is once you get married, everything's okay. And no, it's not. The exception, the exception is not the rule. And I'm not going to throw a percentage out there. I have no idea, but I have yet to see that be the case where yes, marriage is now you get to, you understand your body and you're experiencing the full benefits of it.
No, not at all. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what's down there. Like my husband's like, what? Like, what are you doing?
And you're not alone. We now have family discussions.
Prudish.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Yeah.
It's such a blessing. We have family discussion. Now I have 3 girls and they're all married. And one of the most, and believe it or not, it's one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Not humble, but I'm proud. It feels so good when we're even at the dinner table, just us family, and we're talking about, in a very appropriate way, but very open, about marital sex and what it looks like and how we can improve. We're not crossing boundaries or anything. Well, people might be listening and say, you've already crossed a boundary. No, the fact that we can openly discuss that is a good thing. That, have you considered this? This may help. All of our bodies are different and we go through phases. Like you talked about having a hysterectomy in your book. My wife has had a hysterectomy. That changes the body dramatically. Yeah. What does sex look like after a hysterectomy? Yeah. No one talks about that. And now we do.
We should. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because it's such an important part of our lives. And not in a gross way. But we think of it like, ooh, like, I don't know, especially probably women who've grown up LDS, we're just like, ooh, you don't talk about that. That's not okay. Like your wife's book club, like, ooh, no, we're not going to do that. But
I'll do it in private in my closet where no one sees me.
Yeah, I won't tell anyone.
Maybe.
Yeah. And I had my former sister-in-law, they're since divorced, but she was very open with these things. And so after we got married, she was like, okay, what's going on? Like they let us use their hotel room, like right after we got married before we went on our honeymoon, like they're very, very open. She's very open. So she's like, yeah, like use the tools. Like this helps so much. And I was like, what? We can? Like we're allowed to do that? Yes. Like, yeah. Yes. I'm like, okay. So just like having people be open about it really, it changed my view. Like, oh, okay, other people are doing this. It was not just, in the dark or, sneaking around.
Absolutely.
Anymore.
So I want to be respectful of your time, and I have so many thoughts and questions, and maybe someday we'll have you back. I'm excited to hear the reception on this podcast. But the final question maybe I have for today is, this is a difficult experience, like we were talking at the beginning. First of all, how to recognize that this is an issue, and then how can family best support us? Mm-hmm. What would you recommend that people can do? What is the best way to? I realize there's a broad experience here, like one, being able to identify you have a problem, but let's take it from a place of, well, you're welcome to go with it wherever you want, but I'm thinking specifically, how does a spouse help you now? How do they best support you?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult with OCD. First of all, they need to research it themselves and understand what's going on. If you're going to therapy, like have them come with you to a session and talk to the therapist about like, okay, what should I do in these situations? Because we look to our spouses a lot of times for reassurance, which is a compulsion too. Like, are my pants dirty? Can you look? Can you tell me if they're dirty or not? And if they're like, no, you're fine. Okay, I'm fine. For 5 minutes or something. And then you ask again, like, are you sure? And as they provide that reassurance, they're just really making the OCD worse, even though we're like, no, it feels better. It's not good.
They're
So
enabling it.
it's enabling it. Yeah. And so they have to understand that is a bad thing to do. You think like you're supporting your spouse, you're helping them by saying, no, you're okay, you're fine. But really that is not what they should be doing. It seems counterintuitive. So I think if the spouse like knows that also and doesn't say, I'm not allowed to tell you, but like, what would your therapist say about that? What do you think? We call him Dr. Bob, my therapist. Like, what would Dr. Bob say? Would he want me to tell you that? I'm like, oh, okay. It's like, it's not that I don't love you. It's just, this is for your own good. So you have to stand up sometimes to the person who has OCD if you're the spouse, I think, which can be really difficult. But as long as they like understand that that's what you're doing and you're not just being a jerk, that's important too.
Do you have some sort of plan or did you both discuss possible solutions or approaches so you come up with it beforehand so that it doesn't feel so abrupt or whatever in the moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not going to give you reassurance anymore. I'm like, okay, like, it's your deal. You have to do this. And so, yeah, just being really supportive, supporting like going to therapy. Like, I mean, it can be hard, especially if you have little kids. Like, who's going to watch the kids? My husband was really supportive. Luckily, he worked from home, so we were lucky. But he sometimes I was like, Mom, come over and babysit or something when I had to go to therapy because he knew it was important. So not demeaning your spouse for getting help, which I see sometimes. Husbands like, oh, you don't need therapy.
Oh, absolutely.
No, like support them getting the help that they need, and don't just say, oh, stop, just get better, make yourself think what you're supposed to do. You can't do that. You can't force yourself out of a mental illness. So I think just the support for spouses and parents and knowledge. Like my mom, she read a book about like how, supporting your loved one with OCD. I know, what is his name? Hirschfield has a great book about that, like family members and OCD. Mm-hmm. So, if they read those books, it's, I would see her reading that and like, oh, that's so, she's trying to help me. She, and it will help them. Yeah. Don't make jokes about it. Like my dad would still like send me like stupid jokes like, oh, I'm so OCD. I'm like, Dad, like, look about this. So yeah, just be supportive and understanding what they're going through. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah. Carrie, this has been such a pleasure. And I wish I had discovered you when you first wrote it.
I know, I'm an introvert.
This is such a good experience.
As well as I should have.
Oh, that's quite all right. It's more, I'm disappointed that our community, and maybe it's just me, maybe I wasn't aware, maybe it was being talked about a lot and I just didn't pick up on it. But I want to remind the audience, the listeners, this is a real thing. Scrupulosity is a real thing, and scrupulosity is so hard to detect because it's not as apparent as traditional OCD, if I could call it that. You don't see somebody washing their hands 50 times a day. Well, Carrie, that's also part of your mental health issues. Is
I was there.
Yeah. Contagion and whatnot. A lot of what I see is an absence of traditional OCD. It's spiritual OCD, which is scrupulosity. And it is a very real thing. And I guess maybe in summary, if you're concerned or think, okay, do I have this? Some things I've noticed, at least with clients that I've worked with, is when you feel like you have to go and routinely repent to get that good feeling again, that's a good indicator that you may be dealing with scrupulosity. If you don't feel like you can have or build that relationship with the Lord and create those feelings on your own, that you need that mediator. That's not an absolute statement. I think definitely there's a role that leadership takes. But if you find, often I hear people will say, I think I need to go clear this again. Maybe I didn't tell them everything, or I repented, but oh my goodness, I need to go. I see this with missionaries too, and it sometimes is created in the mission field where you're living this righteous I want to be careful with that word. You're
Obedience
really,
with exactness.
oh, exactness. I won't equate it to righteousness.
Yeah.
We create this rigidity that gives this reward
Mhm.
for living this rigid life. Again, I'm emphasizing the rigidity isn't necessarily a problem. It's how we're defining that relationship with the Lord
Mm.
and requiring that that act to
Yeah.
create it. I wish there was a better definition of it, but it is prevalent. And
Yeah.
if you're concerned about it, pick up Carrie's book and study and research those topics. Her book is excellent. But even you mentioned in the book, a lot of where your help came from is you personally doing the research
Mhm.
and finding the right therapist eventually was
Mhm.
helpful. There is hope, there is help, and uh, reach out, ask questions.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Very welcome. Thanks for talking.
Thank you.